I received your first, so this is my birthday. You know what? I forgot my. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I invited them for 2 festivals.
I'll just say those who want. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, I take this opportunity to welcome our compatriots, our visitors from Denmark to here in South Africa in Cape Town. I hope you enjoyed your stay since yesterday, if I'm not wrong.
But Cape Town, yes, but we actually in Johannesburg before.
Yes. So I would like to welcome you. We have a sitting of Parliament today at 2. So we wouldn't have that much time. We were supposed to have tea upon your arrival. So what I will request, Honorable Michael, is that as and when any one of you wants to have some tea, you can quietly go outside there. There's tea and something to munch, so that we don't stop the discussions. If that is okay with you, then that's fine. Just by the way of introductions, I will start, and the honorable members from the Republic of South Africa's Portfolio Committee on International Relations will then follow. We will also indicate, for your purpose, we will indicate which parties are we coming from, though in terms of the Constitution, we all represent the people of South Africa when we are here in Parliament after our swearing in. So we act in terms of the Constitution of the Republic, whilst at the back of your mind, you keep your party ideology. My name is Supra Mahuma Pelo. I'm the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on International Relations. I'm also a member of the African National Congress National Executive Committee.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Becky Nkosi. I'm a member of the committee and also a member of the ANC.
Yeah, the rest of the delegation that you see here is the staff of Parliament. They are the support infrastructure to the Portfolio Committee. I will now give over to you, Honorable Michael.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman. And first of all, thank you for allowing us to come here today to visit your Parliament and also to have an engagement with our counterparts here in South Africa. We're very happy about that. Just a few words about who we are, and then my colleagues will also introduce themselves. My name is Michael Aastrup Jensen. I am the chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee in the Danish Parliament, and besides, I'm also a spokesperson on foreign affairs. And we all know they are the most important politicians of all kind. No, sorry, but chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee, and we are fairly unique actually compared to perhaps also your committee, which is actually, we're mentioned in the Danish constitution as the only committee in Denmark. And it stipulates quite clearly that the Danish government has to seek advice and consultation from our committee before the Danish government make any great important decision on foreign policy and security related issues. So every meeting we have, the Prime Minister either attends, the Foreign Minister attends, Defense Minister attends, and we can call upon any minister we want. So we have a very close connection with the ministers. We don't agree always. We have a full-fledged committee with both opposition and the majority represented, as you also see in this delegation. But we have a very close connection with the government and are also well briefed with both the intelligence agencies, our military, and of course our hardworking people in our MFA. You will probably also ask yourself, why are we coming to South Africa? And the primary reason is actually two for coming. Just before we went to South Africa, we visited Ethiopia and the African Union headquarters in Addis as well. But we're seeing this geopolitical shifts, some would say, where some superpowers are trying to reshift the status quo. And we are somewhat worried about that. So we thought it was good to come to see for ourselves and try to engage in that area. We see it on numerous things. We see it in the war regarding, the war against time ever is going to draft up a strategy
much. My name is Henrik Dahl. I represent the other it's my third term in Parliament, and I've been looking forward to this, but I thought I might perhaps share with you that I'm seeking election to the European Parliament 3 months from now. So if and when we get a time to talk about South African EU relations, I would be very interested to participate in that conversation, because hopefully I will be off to Brussels after our summer recess. We will see what the electorate has to say, but the polls indicate that I might be going. Thank you.
This way. Okay, I'm Sasha Faxe, and I am also a member of the opposition. I'm in the Alternative Party, which is the Green Party, which also has a strong rights-based approach. And I'm also looking forward to our conversation. As our chairman said, there are things, and also what we have seen that you're interested in, where we may not agree, but on a large scale, I would say we do agree over the broad spectrum of politics in Denmark in our foreign affairs, but there are also things that we may not. So I'm looking forward to hear your perspectives.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Falkenberg. I am also a member of Danish Parliament and member of the committee. I'm actually elected on the Faroe Islands, and I support the Danish government. And to speak about another Liberal party, then I represent the Faroese Liberal Party. So we actually have 3 Liberal parties here today. But I'm a part of the Liberal group, which the chairman also are. So I am a part of their parliamentary group. And you may not know that the Kingdom of Denmark, we have 2 elected from the Faroe Islands and 2 from Greenland. And I am one of the Faroese members in the Danish Parliament.
And then, of course, we have the ambassador here as well. And then we have hardworking staff from both the embassy, for MFA, and from the Danish Parliament to accompany us as well.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jensen. I see now it's almost 1 o'clock. It's 1:15, so we don't have much time. As you know, South Africa got its democracy in 1994. The 27th of April this year will be marking our 30th anniversary. That culmination of 27 April 1994 came after a protracted struggle against both colonialism and apartheid, which has been here for over 300 years. And after that protracted struggle, all sides agreed that we need to establish a new country that belongs to all who live in it. That's what we say in the ANC, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And our path is basically based on what Nelson Mandela says, our late president, of reconciliation and nation building. That no matter the difficulties, we have to always remember that we have to reconcile and build the nation and be united in our diversities. So that's the important dynamism in South Africa, that we have to always at times pass over to the next generations that are going to be following us. As you know, the Constitution says that South Africa has got 3 arms of the state. We've got the independent judiciary, we've got the executive, we've got then parliament, which is responsible for lawmaking. And the parliament also does the oversight on the executive. So these 3 arms of the state are independent but interdependent. We always make sure that there's checks and balances. One arm of the state doesn't influence the other arm of the state. On the economic front, South Africa faces a very serious sluggish economic growth. I mean, a day before yesterday, projections were that we are now growing at 0.1 or 2%. That has got a huge implication on what as government we have adopted as the triple challenges of poverty, of inequality, and unemployment. Our hope is that as we continue to renew and build our economy, countries like yourselves and so on will strengthen and deepen foreign direct investment into South Africa. There are many things where I think you know where you can invest here in South Africa, whether it's mining, whether it's tourism, many other sectors of the economy, agriculture, engineering, ICT, and so on. So it's our hope that the world can work with us to rebuild our economy so that it can grow around 5, 6, 7%. Then we will be able to deal with these triple challenges of poverty, of inequality, and unemployment. We are a multi-party democracy here in South Africa. We use a PR system, proportional representation. So our system is such that it's very difficult to have an overwhelmingly dominant one party type of a state because of the formula which was worked at the CODESA during the negotiations. So even the smallest parties get to be represented after the elections. In the same breath, our elections are taking place on the 29th of May. This year, you may have read many other things about the possibilities, the scenarios, and so on. I will not get into that. We will leave that to the voter. So on around the 2nd of June or so, or the 3rd, we will know what the voter has, of course, decided. And all those who are coming with different scenarios will be working on new scenarios now that the voter will have made the final determination. There are serious challenges that are facing us, as I said, of poverty, of inequality, of unemployment, of crime, of corruption. I also like to include in the crime and corruption greed, because in my own view, because of the high levels of unemployment and where we come from as a country, the type of system we inherited implanted the culture of greed amongst the society. Though we are pushing our people to work towards Batopilo, which is people first, as part of this Mandela vision of building reconciliation and nation building. South Africa is part of the SADC community. We are also part of the Africa arrangement. We are part of the African Union. You also know that we are now part of the BRICS plus countries. At the economic front, we work with everybody in the world. As long as those states and institutions and companies come to invest in South Africa and understand our path, our constitution, our policies, our regulations, and become part of this nation building project here in South Africa. We play a lot of role in the United Nations and its ancillary bodies. I'm sure you know, you interact with our minister there and other people who represent us at the United Nations level and all those other ancillary bodies. We work with the IMF, the World Bank, those Bretton Woods institutions. Of course, South Africa is calling for their transformation, starting with the United Nations. We also want to see in the United Nations representation of Africa in the United Nations. We think these global financial institutions must be transformed such that they can assist the developing countries to at least come closer to the level of the developed countries. It requires a conscious effort on the part of the developed countries, those who have got veto status within the United Nations, to say we have to change the way we've been running these global institutions so that the developing countries can come up. Because if you don't, there will be instability in the world. There will continue to be all these migration patterns that are taking place, and people are dying in the sea trying to cross to Europe. We lose many lives of people trying to cross to Europe driven by poverty. Of course, others are driven by crime, because there are syndicates all over the world around crime, whether it's drugs and many other things. Others do illegal trades of many other things which we don't have time to get into here. So in Parliament here, you will see we've got different political parties. So our system is such that the committees of Parliament will have all the political parties. Because ANC is a majority, it will always have more members in committees than other parties. But what we have agreed to as the ANC is that we must never be arrogant with our majority. We need to use our majority in a matured manner that seeks to drive South Africa forward. Of course, in politics, I mean, there will be instances where others will go overboard about the majority and so on. Ideologically, obviously, we are different parties, but we are bound by the constitution of the republic. Just briefly at an international level, I've spoken about trade agreements that we have with the rest of the key economies in the world. We also participate in peace missions within the African continent, as you know now. As part of the SADC mission for peace, you'll find the troops from South Africa in the DRC and other parts of of the African continent. You would know our stance in as far as the Ukraine and Russia situation is concerned. It's well known over the world that as South Africa, we will prefer and will stick to that path that whatever happens, we must ensure that there is negotiations, there's engagement between Ukraine and Russia within the context of the United Nations as a body responsible for engagements at that level. You would know that as South Africa, we became part of Africa Initiative to visit Ukraine, meet with President Zelensky, meet President Putin in Russia, to make sure that some process towards dialogue can begin. And in the meantime, do other negotiations like the release of children and so on, and also making sure that this war can come to an end so that the circulation of food, because one of the problems that has come up, which is a threat to food security, coming from that particular war. So South Africa's stance is that the sooner that war comes to an end, the better. I was with the minister a day before yesterday of International Relations, Minister Pando, and she reported to me, because I asked about that initiative and where we are now. And she says as late as last week, Thursday, President Ramaphosa was in touch with President Zelensky. They are actually planning for President Zelensky to visit South Africa soon. They are just working out the modalities to continue those discussions. Of course, there's beginning to, according to her, to be some concern that we seem to be now speaking more to President Zelensky than Russia. I'm sure they will manage that at their level. But it was important for us to continue that discussion with those two countries because of historical relations between South Africa and Russia. It puts South Africa in a better position to engage with the Russians in some of the sticky issues so that those matters can be resolved. I think you also know where we stand as South Africa on Gaza, the situation that is going there. But broadly, historically, it's not just on Gaza. It's on the matter of the Palestinian state and the Israeli state. Our position will not change, that we need a two-state solution. And my wish is that, because I can see the situation is not getting resolved, if we can bring a global forum or initiative of all those states that support a two-state solution, to come together and say, we need to engage both Palestine and Israel to move as quickly as possible beyond what is happening in Gaza. The lasting solution there will be a two-state solution so that they exist side by side as the two states managing their own affairs. Then at the United Nations level, they will then have to recognize those two states, because future generations, in my view, must inherit a Palestine and Israel that are living in peace side by side. We will want Europe to play a much assertive role in helping us in Africa at two fronts. One is on development and economic growth, and secondly is on resolving conflicts that are there in the African continent, particularly those who colonized some of the countries here in Africa. It's a way of saying we colonized you, but now we are going to be partners in making sure that we rebuild your countries, instead of what is happening in some of the countries in Africa where through corporations and companies, there will be a war ignited, for instance, over minerals in the African continent, and people lose their lives just because people are pursuing profit at all costs. As South Africa, we want to work with everybody at a global level to make sure that we bring peace it doesn't matter where we should be bringing peace. Through the United Nations, through state-to-state relations, we think as South Africa, the weapon that we must always use is negotiations as a way of resolving conflict. I'm going to give our colleagues, because we don't necessarily share the same views, for them to express whatever views that they have, so that we can then hand over to you to raise whatever issues that you want to raise and begin to wrap up our meeting. On my progressive left here, we've got, I don't know whether you'll start, Honorable Powell. And then after Honorable Powell, we will have Honorable Montweli from the Economic Freedom Fighters.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we have to differentiate in this committee in Parliament between what is a DIRCO, a Department of International Relations and Cooperation position, and what is a individual party political position. I think what the Honourable Supra has alluded to are largely DIRCO positions, specifically in relation to South Africa and the South African government's position around non-alignment, and the role that the South African government and the department in particular has played in attempting to mediate towards a peaceful resolution between Russia and Ukraine. From a party political perspective, I think that the positions are somewhat more radicalized and aligned than what they are from a departmental perspective. And so I appreciate the Honourable Supra having taken more of a DIRCO position in this space. I understand that there were a number of items on the agenda that your committee was interested in understanding, specifically in regards to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, Palestine and Israel, and of course the ICJ matter. I understand that there were some questions around Mozambique and terrorism and the impact on South Africa, and specifically what's going on in the Cabo Delgado region, and obviously any other questions. So I don't want to dominate by speaking at you, because I understand you have questions and this should be a space of dialogue. But just to put on the table very briefly what my party political positions are in regards to the agenda items. So firstly, we of course consider Russia to be an aggressor in the conflict in Ukraine. It is a war of aggression. Ukraine is a sovereign state and has the right to sovereignty. We believe that Putin was motivated by imperialistic ideals, the notion of empire and the expansion of empire. We believe that the rhetoric that we've heard around sort of NATO expansionism and that proposing a threat to the domestic sovereign security of the Russian state is intellectually dishonest, given that Russia has for many years had NATO neighbors who have not posed any risk. We believe that there is an urgency in terms of geopolitics at this juncture. I was at the Munich Security Conference 3 weeks ago, and the mood in Europe, as all of you are aware, is very demure. The title of the conference was Lose-Lose. More needs to be done to provide Ukraine with the resources that it needs to counter and combat Russian imperialist aggression. And we have, of course, as a party, encouraged actors with access to those kinds of resources to move with speed, because this war poses potentially an existential threat to not only the security of the immediate neighbors in the region, countries like Moldova, etc., but also to Western Europe. And of course, that has significant consequences for the rest of the world. The Honourable Supra has already spoken about, from an African perspective, the consequences that this war of aggression is having in terms of rising fertilizer costs and the impact that that's having here in South Africa. We're seeing it with wheat costs rising. We have, however, we have a terrible energy insecurity situation in South Africa. We call it load shedding. You would understand it better as rolling blackouts. And I have been deeply moved and inspired by how quickly Western European nations have managed to find alternative sources of energy in light of no longer receiving gas supplies from from Russia. And I think that there's huge amounts of learning that we can do in terms of understanding how nations have done that so speedily. Then in terms of the Israel-Gaza conflict, we have, as the Democratic Alliance, of course, echoed the call for a two-state solution. We have condemned, we have essentially labeled the conflict as a war between rationality and radicalism. So we do, as an organization, as an independent political party, consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, and we are very clear about that. We, of course, do not believe that they are the bona fide democratically elected representatives of the Palestinian people, and that the Palestinian people deserve sovereignty, peace, and security, and democratically elected government. We therefore believe that as a state, South Africa should be engaging with the Palestinian Liberation Authority and that umbrella body. At present, our government engages both with Hamas and the PLO. And so, of course, ministers, politicians, public voices within Israel who are speaking about moving away from a two-state solution, we have condemned, as we have in terms of sentiments that come out of Hamas in terms of from the river to the sea, essentially a dog whistle to the eradication of the Israeli state. So we believe in the right to both Palestine and Israel coexisting side by side in peace. That said, the escalating violence, the lack of sufficient adequate food, medicine, supplies that are, it is a great concern for us. We've spoken out that more must be done. We've called on the Arab world to mediate. We have not labeled the conflict as a genocide. We believe that that is for the ICJ to determine. However, we have condemned the loss of any innocent civilian lives. However, we do also know that the numbers that come out of the Gaza Health Ministry label every death as a civilian death. We know that there are Hamas fighters amongst those that are written down as civilians. So we take a somewhat more moderate approach than, for example, my colleagues to my right or behind me. And we do, of course, welcome any engagement that South Africa can play in mediating. The last thing that I'll say is that, and my colleagues will forgive me for speaking politically, I am a politician, and there is a time and point that swords do need to be drawn. I am, however, we are increasingly concerned that given the democratic backslide that is occurring on the African continent, we've seen a string of 8 coups or coup d'etats in West Africa in the Sahel region. We have seen a bloodbath unfolding in Sudan, whereby in November last year, the people who I speak to in Sudan told me that the death count at that point was 15,000, which was in fact higher than the number of individuals that had been, or civilians that had lost their lives in Gaza at that point in time. Then, of course, we have got a sham election that has taken place in Zimbabwe, and South Africa deals with the net consequence of the economic migration and economic migrants that come into South Africa seeking work. In the context, of course, of our own unemployment rate being close to 40%, at a youth level being 7 out of 10 young people being unemployed. Now we have potentially in excess of 3 million economic migrants from Zimbabwe as a result of the political situation in Zimbabwe. And we, of course, welcome the United States targeted sanctions that were announced in terms of President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his cohort of the cohort that surrounds him. We were deeply concerned that the SADC's observation and monitoring report that essentially chalked that election up to a sham election was not adopted. When the leaders of the SADC met with the Secretariat, it was filed in file 13A and never saw the light of day. Our president, of course, flew across, congratulated Emmerson Mnangagwa for what was a sham election. And so this is where I say I have to draw my sword. We are concerned that there is somewhat of a contradiction in terms of South Africa currently trying to position itself as the bastion and the giant in the fight for human rights and civilian lives, freedom, democracy, when in our own backyard we turn the other way when we have a genuine stake, domestic interest in acting and taking substantive measures. We believe that multilateral fora on the African continent, the SADC, and specifically the AU, are at this point in time not adequately utilized. We share the ANC's call for the Bretton Woods institutions and the United Nations apparatus to be reformed to give Africa and the global south a greater voice at the table. It's something that we've spoken about quite loudly. And the last thing that I'll say is about BRICS, the expanded BRICS Plus. It has been the position of our party as the official opposition in South Africa that BRICS prior to the expansion was essentially somewhat of it posed no harm, no risk, and nor had it positioned itself as an overt ideological rival to the values of the Western world. But we've seen with our countries drift into what we believe the axis of malign actors, and the, of course, expansion now including nations, theocratic dictatorships like Iran, that the BRICS Plus group are now overtly attempting to position themselves as a competitor to the G7, both from a fiscal and an economic perspective in terms of this discussion around a common currency, etc., but also from a values perspective, and an increasing tolerance for tyranny, oppression, terror, closed systems. And so the intellectual dishonesty that I speak about is using the auspices of non-alignment to condone the actions of bad, malign actors who have not got, who do not share in the vision that all of us have for a free, tolerant, peaceful, and just world. And so my party has embarked on a series of outreach projects, meeting with embassies and missions throughout the world to reaffirm that the Constitution of South Africa remains sacrosanct and that we will continue to defend it, and that the people of South Africa, these are hard-won freedoms that we will continue to defend. So that is what I have to say. I don't know if either of my colleagues would like to add anything. The Honourable Father.
Thank you. I think Emma said most of everything. Politically, just we as parties, as I've seen in your country as well, you're a few parties that have come together as type of coalition government. First time in a long time, and it's actually working. It took you 6 weeks to get everything together, from what I've read, which is a super record time. We obviously, as opposition parties, are also trying to do the same. Obviously, you've read about it. It's going very well. As Honourable Supra says, the electorate will actually vote, and we hope that it's a free and fair election. We would like all of you guys to obviously be there to see to it that free and fair elections does take place. We can't have what we see in other countries. Hopefully, from what we understand from our president, it will not happen. But the more the merrier for other countries to come and actually see that it will be free and fair. And from our part, we hope to have coalitions working and to be able to be an alternative government for the people of South Africa, because we do believe that we have a super, super country. We offer so much. And we believe that come 29 of May, we will have a new government. That is what we hope for, and we will look forward to, as a South African government with coalition partners, be able to work together with everyone, especially our business partners that we've had in the West and in Europe, which is the most valuable partners, the biggest partners by far. And let's see what happens the 29th. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Guntur. Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Nkosi.
Oh, I'm speaking. Oh, no, yes. Oh, no, thanks, Chairperson. And welcome, Chairperson and the delegation. I think that for me, the following. Firstly, is that South Africa must be regarded as a sovereign country that takes independent decisions, both domestically and in foreign policy. That we do not in any way subscribe to an influence foreign policy. So we take independent decisions on our own as a sovereign state and as a sovereign player in international relations. And for that, I don't think that it should be surprising when we take independent decisions that may seem to isolate that as loners. But it must be understood that we exercise our sovereignty and we want that to be an unfettered exercise of such sovereignty. We do this in the context of and guided by our membership of international bodies, but also respecting international law and international humanitarian law and all protocols that bind us as a player in the international field. Is the geopolitical shifts? I don't think so. I don't think there's geopolitical shifts. I think it's a realization of Europe that for a long time, Europe and the friends across the Atlantic have ignored Africa and the global South, and in particular the progressives in these countries. So I think perceptual Europe will think that there is a geographic shift, but in fact there is none. If you look historically at the relations that we have had with the world, we have always remained where we are, particularly as former colonized countries and in our case as former liberation movements have not shifted. So geographic shifts or geopolitical shifts may sound very acceptable, but I don't think that there is. I think that there is no realignment, but there's actually an expression of what we have always stood for: anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and the need for the African continent and in particular, but the global South to have a voice in international bodies, in international relations. I share the view with my colleague that, geographic conflicts in the continent should be viewed in a very holistic manner. And that means all players, all factors that influence these conflicts should be examined quite objectively. The role of the West, the continued colonial relations and imperial interests, particularly of France in West Africa. So my view is that there is no such as geographic geopolitical shifts. It may seem so, but from where I stand, it is not so. On Russia, my view, while they resonate with what the chairperson has said and what the government has said, I take a very historical view that if you look at your history as Europeans, Russia has always been regarded as the backwater of the entire of Europe. And the view, even from the past in centuries ago, was that Russia is undeveloped, can never be developed, is never civilizational, and can never bring anything to the world. And that's the emergence of the Russophobia in Europe. And this extends even beyond 1917, and in particular, even beyond 1945, irrespective of the role that Russia as Russia or the Soviet Union at the time played in World War II to shift the balance of forces in Russia, Europe continued to regard Russia as a backwater. And I really don't think that, viewing that view can be implanted to us in the South, because we had and have different relations with Russia, in particular in the form of the USSR and after its disintegration with Russia as a state. So my historical view really is that Russia played a crucial role in shifting the balance of forces, particularly after 1945, and in shaping the new world international relations that we have. They may have their own problems. They may have their own conception of what democracy is. And if that does not resonate with Europe or continental Europe, it's unfortunate. But Europe has to accept that Russia is part of the entire of Europe and not a problem child in that regard. I concur with what the chair has said about the need for a negotiated solution in the continent, and particularly with the situation in Ukraine, that negotiations are the only way of resolving the conflict. There's no way in which, as a government or as a party, will support continued conflict and war in that part of the world. That's why we will always advocate for a negotiated solution, irrespective of the attitude or the friendships that we have with Russia. That's why we speak to both Ukraine and Russia, and correctly so. We will not shy away from that. We will speak to both of them to find a solution. On the issue of Palestine, I think we are agreed. It's just a matter of emphasis, and where you stand ideologically, which is not something that you do in real politics. Because in real politics, you look at the situations as it is, irrespective of ideological orientation. That the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a geopolitical issue that has to do with the entire Arab world and the encroachment of the West in the Arab world. And the seeking, if you check during both during the Bushes, Barack Obama and Clinton, they've always sought to create a geopolitical and security influence in the Arab world. And Israel is particularly important in that regard. And that is why the conflict will not be resolved until particularly those across the Atlantic realize that the Palestinian people have a right to their own sovereignty. Chair, I think with regards to conflicts in Africa, I just want to indicate that as a country, we do not act as a hegemon. We act within and as part of the continent. In SADC, we act within the SADC formations that are there. We act as part of the African Union, and we will act as part of the United Nations and bodies that we belong to, BRICS, bodies that we belong to in the South, and interest bodies that accentuate and articulate the views of the global South. And we do so at various levels, party to party, particularly in SADC and the continent, but we also do so through state-to-state relations and the important role that we think we play in multilateral institutions and organizations. We do not and will never be enticed into acting as a big brother in the continent. We are not that. We don't have that capacity. And given our history and the devastation that was caused by the previous government in SADC in particular, in the form of invasions, military incursions in Botswana, Mozambique, in Lesotho, in Swaziland, and Namibia. We want to move away from that. That's why our view is that when we act, we should act in a reciprocal manner, recognizing the sovereignty of others as they do recognize ours, and the inputs that we make on a continual basis. I'm concluding by just making a good observation on the place of your foreign policy committee, that is actually constitutional. Ours is not. The foreign policy and foreign relations, whatever, belongs to and is guided by the president. I think it's a good thing that maybe as we evolve in another 30 years, it's something that we can learn, that to sit in a foreign relations committee, and I think it's the same with Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, where the foreign policy of the country is actually discussed and as in a real multi-party situation where the president comes or the foreign minister comes and there is agreement, so that what is articulated becomes one. I don't think we've developed to that point, but it's an innovation that one is prepared to learn. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Honorable Johnson, the next 28 minutes or so, I give them to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you so much for your very frank and also precise statements from the different political parties. That was actually quite insightful to hear. Just a couple of comments from my perspective, and also therefore my party, and therefore also the government's position, and then of course my colleagues. I can almost feel them eagerly wanted to take the floor, so they will also get that possibility, of course. But just allow me to start. First of all, I fully understand South Africa and other African countries need for say quite clearly that there is a historical past with some European countries. But remember who you're talking to. You're talking to Denmark. Our imperialistic past is quite small. You have to go back to the Vikings to actually say something quite bad about us. And we weren't established as a state by that time. So please remember who you're talking to. I'm just saying. And then I also have to say, it's the first. I've been in Parliament for 19 years. And working with foreign policy for about 16 of those. I've never heard that Russia and China should be progressive states. That's a first. So thank you for that. I visited Russia many, many times. And when I was allowed to visit Russia, I'm not allowed anymore because Russia don't want me. And also China and states where LGBT rights is forbidden, when there's no democracy at all. And when we have close friends and colleagues who are put in prison for 25 to 30 years on bogus charges, and also Navalny being killed in prison, Boris Nemtsov, who I spoke at the funeral for, that was the last time I was allowed to Moscow, who were gunned down in front of Kremlin, to tell me that these are progressive states. Well, we believe Denmark is a progressive state, and we don't want to be, compared to those kind of states. Regarding, UN and other things, I think we all agree on that. There are some historical past regarding UN that should be reformed, of course. I don't know if you know that, but we actually are a candidate for a membership of the Security Council starting from January next year. And right now there's no opposition. So we believe the elections are going quite well. And we will be a part of that council. And one of the things that we will work on will also be reforms, inside. And we actually apparently got our homework, so that's good. We have a brochure about our candidate status for that, and also our program, I think, what we will touch upon. But also let me say a few words about Russia and Ukraine in particular, because I understand that the war in Ukraine are far away from South Africa, because it is geographically, but it's quite close to us. And that's also why we are 11 parties in the parliament. 11 parties from left wing to right wing. All 11 parties are completely unified in our approach regarding Ukraine. We have complete unity when we have decided on our donations to Ukraine. We, according to the White House, are the #1 per capita who are supplying the most to Ukraine. We have, with our Dutch and Norwegian colleagues, right now are training Ukrainian pilots in Denmark so that we can give them the F-16s that will help them stop the terrorist bombardment of civilians in Ukraine by Russia. We have given them all our artillery pieces. We were brand new artillery pieces, all of them. We are, with the Germans, spearheading the tank coalition, which are giving them Leopard 1 and Leopard 2 tanks, which are the most effective tanks in the world, and so on and so on. And why are we doing that? Well, our committee visited Ukraine twice during the war, since the full-fledged invasion. And the reason for that is because it's a black and white issue for us. We have a bully, Russia, who before the full-fledged invasion actually occupied a part of all European countries. You know, we were also in Moldova some months ago where we visited the president of Moldova, who told us quite clearly that the only reason why we have not been completely occupied, because part of Moldova today is occupied by Russia, is because of the war in Ukraine. Because otherwise the Russian tanks would, in the Moldovan president's view, would continue on and occupy the complete country of Moldova, which is a completely independent, free country. Of that, as well as Georgia, of course, were also part since the 2008 war, were occupied by Russia. So for us, it is a black and white security issue. You know, we have a state that is threatening us, and it's not just something we, think about. It's what President Putin himself has stated. He wants to go back to how it was back in the early days of the Tsar's Russia. And I can tell you, our Finnish friends were quite appalled by that because Finland were part of Russia at that time. So that's one of the primary reasons why Finland have joined NATO. It's one of the primary reasons Sweden have joined NATO. It's because they're threatened. So they have actually kicked out, for Sweden's perspective, it's 200 years of neutrality. And they say, we're threatened right now by a bully who is trying to bully Europe and therefore the entire world indirectly. So for us, it is really a black and white issue. We believe if you want to have clear-cut ideals about rule of law, about states' sovereignty and other things, there's no negotiations, there's no moderation or anything like that. It's a black and white issue for us. So we are sorry that the rest of the world doesn't see it like that. We really are, because we live it in today, and we are extremely worried about the upcoming years, about how it can threaten not only the security of Europe, but the peace around the world. We have ministers in Sweden and in Finland who are worried about a World War III. Every time I meet the ambassador for Finland, he tells me about how they have built even more bomb shelters for the civilian population. When I meet my Baltic colleagues, they're talking about how they right now are militarizing the border to be able to combat Russian tanks when, in their view, they're coming for the Baltic states. So for us, it is really a black and white issue. And I understand the history. I really do. And please remember also, if you really understand the history, you should also understand the history about Denmark-South African ties, because we were actually the first westernized country to actually support the sanctions. So again, remember who you're talking to. We are also quite wary about Russia in particular, because some of the things we don't actually want to acknowledge that much was As probably all know, we were occupied by the Germans in Second World War. But when the Germans were beat, the Russians actually occupied the island of Bornholm for almost a year after the Second World War. And there were negotiations and so on, and then they left. But they were actually in complete military control of an island of the Kingdom of Denmark. So we know how it is. And you should also remember about history, the Molotov-Ribbentrop, contract, or you can call it a contract or a deal or whatever you call it, where it quite clearly was decided before the war that how Europe was drawn up. So that was why Russia could attack the Baltic states, how Russia could attack Finland, and not only could attack Poland a couple of days after Germans attacked Poland from the west. So we are worried about Russia because we live quite close to Russia. We know what Russia does in everyday life. And I don't understand quite, and sorry, I'm not a diplomat, as you can hear. But the Russian economy is so small. It's the same size as Spain. It's the same size as Spain. So when you talk about how Russia should take, your main trade partner is the European Union, which Denmark is a part of. It's European Union. It's not Russia. And Russia's economy will never have, well, in the next 100 years anyway, be able to be at the same size as the European Union, coming from a perspective of Spain's economy and that. So again, I understand your history. And actually, fun fact about that, I heard yesterday, I don't know if it's true or not, so I'm just putting it out there, but some scholars actually here in Johannesburg told us that the strongest tie was with the Soviet Union, and actually, to be precise, Ukraine in Soviet Union, where there was actually training of ANC. So if we really should talk about history, perhaps you should choose your side more wisely. Sorry. I'm not a diplomat. I'll hand it over to our vice chair.
Thank you very much. You put it very eloquently. We shall be leaving for Europe and Denmark tomorrow. And with all due respect, I have to say that I find the position of the ANC and the EFF highly contradictory, because I cannot think of one principle that the South African constitution is based on that Russia is not against. The South African constitution is based on democracy, it's based on rule of law, it's based on respect for human rights, it's based on adhering to the UN Charter, which means that you respect national self-determination. So I just cannot think of one principle that Russia is not against that informs your own constitution. Also, I cannot think of one thing that Russia represents that the ANC did not fight in the years up to 1994. As far as I remember, the ANC was fighting imperialism. The ANC was fighting the people's right to determine for themselves. The ANC was fighting for a right to a national existence within secure borders, and Russia is against everything. Russia is a fascist dictatorship that has been the bane of Europe for hundreds of years. Russia took part in the dissolution of Poland in 1795, and they have been going on and on. They tried to invade Poland again in 1920. They destabilized Germany in the years up to Hitler's power grab. They made a deal with the Third Reich and started the Second World War. And I have to respect one thing in Russia, which is their propaganda, because Russia tries to make it look like they ended the First World War. They ended a world war that they themselves started on 17th of September 1939, when, in agreement with the Third Reich, they invaded Poland from the east. And there was a joint celebration a few days later in Warsaw, where Nazi Germany and Soviet Union jointly celebrated the fact that they had conquered Poland. So they started the Second World War. They imposed an enormous amount of suffering on Eastern Europe, and they have invaded several countries in Europe, and they're having troops there now. This is everything the ANC is against, that Russia is doing right now. So I shall stop here, but I have to say honestly, I will go back and write a note to myself and say this is highly contradictory.
Thank you. I'll start a different place, giving a little bit of background also. So as our chairperson said, yes, we do agree that on the Ukraine politics across the whole spectrum. But before I go there, I'll say my background is started out as an activist in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s, just so you know. And it has set a course for my way of being in the world. My whole entire life, a right-based approach that is so important. It runs through everything. So I've not been a member of a party before. We had a party that actually put all of life in the center. So I don't see any party in South Africa resembling the party I'm coming from, because it's an ecocentric party and not a liberal or socialist or distribution of wealth party, but actually seeing the life as one, because that's where I come from. Everything is one. And I wanted to state that before I go on, because that will also maybe give you an idea why I'm saying what I am. And I do actually share the surprise of my colleagues here, even though on a daily basis, some of the things around this, we do actually disagree highly on, and I'll try to elaborate on that. So you get an idea about it, because I've known what the ANC was since I was a very young. I was not even a woman at that time, as I was a young girl. And I spent my time after school in rallying in the streets for the rights in South Africa. It's just to say we are one people. And with that, of course, also came the rights of Palestine and the Palestinians. It's part of that game for me. And I studied history. So I must just say it's a bit hard to hear European history being lectured in that way. That I'm sorry to say that, because I do not actually see it in the same way as it came. And I've spent many years on traveling throughout Africa, working with rights and development projects. And I don't hold that I understand everything, but I have really tried to teach myself, because coming from the background I do, I'm not a minority in my country. We all more or less all look the same. And those who don't, in my party, they are the core of our party. We stand for minority rights, and that being handicapped, being color background, being a different religion, that's what we fight for on a daily basis. And it's not to lecture on our politics, but so therefore, I do acknowledge that in Denmark, the government and a vast majority of the parliament has actually supported Israel's right to defend itself. But we are few parties, and amongst myself, one of those who have stood on the grounds of what I hear you more or less agree on in different words, how you put it across your political spectrum, of seeing there needs to be this need to stop. And we've said that from the beginning. Denmark, I need to say, on a cross, I'm not sure all parties, but most parties are actually on a two-state solution. So that's not the thing. It's not an issue. We do agree on that one. But in the current situation, I've been very outspoken in the rights of the civilians, and international law should be upheld. And I've received death threats for it. I mean, that's part of the game, standing up for this. So it's just to give you the background. And from that perspective, I deep in my heart can't understand how anyone can support Russia when they are supporting Palestine. I simply just don't understand it, because they have been oppressing people for so long, and we still, throughout Europe, live with the ramifications. Now we're speaking about some of like what has happened in Ukraine and Moldova and so on, but so many people that have grown up and been born under the heavy load of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, they are still marked. They live in I mean, we have, like you have in Africa, we have mobility. So we have a lot of people living in Denmark now that may have been grown up in Romania, Poland, all those countries you don't hear much about today, but they are still impacted by what they were living under during the Soviet Union. And so one thing is also both the history, but also the current situation. So for my part, there's a really deep urge and hope that you will see that, because I think when we look at the international law, this has nothing to do with that. It's pure colonialistic imperialism and the dream of a big, big empire that runs Russia, seen from work. And that doesn't mean all of the Russian people. I need to say that. I'm speaking like, when I'm speaking about Israel, I'm speaking about the government. When I'm speaking about Russia, I'm speaking about the government. I mean, I have Russian Jewish ancestors. I don't hate Russia. I don't hate Russians, but it's about the people who are running that place right now. So it's just, I need to say that before I go on with the things, because just so you know where we are coming from, and I think that's a deep underlying thing. We do disagree on Gaza, but I've never seen any unity around things as I have with Russia, and I'm also seeing that it has changed quite a number of political parties' policies around foreign politics in Denmark. What we have seen happening in Ukraine, especially not the last, maybe not so much the past 10 years, but especially the past 2 years when it escalated. We see it as a war that has gone on for 10 years. When they went into Crimea, we have to remind ourselves of that. And also when I speak with my Ukrainian friends, they say, no, it's not a new war. It's just an escalated war, seen from their perspective. So it's just to give another perspective of that. And I know we're short of time, and also have other colleagues who haven't spoken yet. So, because I was also curious, because what is hard for us in Denmark, given that we're an extreme minority, also supporting your lawsuit against Israel. And so I wanted to know more about it, and also I know you need to go back. But if we had more time, that's where I would have loved to go deeper into that, because I need to read it in the papers on UN websites and so on. So to understand what is driving there. And to my surprise, I mean, I'm not liberal, but I mean, some of the things you brought forward is actually resonated a lot with me when you talked about how to address that issue. So it's just to give you a perspective, and just say, I think that is some of the context, that no matter where you come from and what beliefs you have in Denmark, I mean, there's so few people who, I haven't met any that could actually understand what you're saying, and throughout Europe. And I do know we have a history, also mutual history, and I may not necessarily agree fully on that we are not part of the colonialism, but I think there's only a way that we as such a small country and we can partake, is that we have open discussions and see how can we together move it to a new place, because we all have a history. So how do we make that common history be for a way that we can create a world where actually equality is the underlying factor? So that's for me. I mean, you're all my brothers and sisters. I do still see you as one, even though I do disagree on Russia with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know time is running, but Anna Falkenberg, because we have to include overseas territory in the kingdom as well, otherwise I'll get complaints. No. Anna.
I'll make it very short. Thank you, first of all, very much for your presentations now, and also for us. It's very helpful for us seeing which different opinions there are in the different parties, because where we sit, for myself, in the North Atlantic Ocean and 18 small islands, we often hear that South Africa has like one voice out in what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, and in the Gaza, for example. So it's very, very helpful for me to also hear that there are nuance in all of the parties. I can say for myself, and from the Faroese perspective, we have historically a very, very close relationship with Russia, both trade-wise and also on cooperation in general. And as being a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, we have been a little bit more neutral. We're not a state, so we can't say we're a neutral state, but we have been in between East and West somehow. But we have seen, after the invasion of Ukraine, a huge switch in the Faroese political mentality. We have, for the first time, made sanctions towards Russia. We have received the Ukrainian refugees. We have closed our harbors for Russian fishing ships. So we see, I would say, what I'm trying to say is I understand the historic question or aspect of what you're trying to tell us, but from our part, the eye-opening event was the invasion of Ukraine. For us, really taking a side on standing on the West side and being very glad being a part of NATO, through the Kingdom of Denmark. So I agree with a lot of my colleagues here, but I would just also give a wish and a hope that the broad political spectrum in South Africa also sees that, because it is a question of peace in world. And it's very, very scary to think of that we are maybe, some countries say, close to a third world war, I would say. Just I'll try to make it short. Hopefully.
And that was perfect. It's just because, you know, when politicians talk somehow, sometimes diplomats have to go in and clean it up. So I'll give the floor to our ambassador.
So I'm a diplomat. And South Africa and Denmark have very long and very good relations. Your president and our prime minister signed a strategic partnership 2 years ago. Our prime minister visited in June last year, and our foreign minister just left this morning, actually going on to Ethiopia. So he has had a very good meeting with the Minister Pender yesterday, and also they had a lively discussion, not as lively as today, but they also on some issues agreed to disagree. But they agreed definitely that we have democracy and human rights and international law in common, and that they would continue working on that. And I think that was very good. And it's important to continue the dialogue, even though we disagree. He also invited her to a foreign ministers meeting in Copenhagen in the beginning of May, where the Nordic foreign ministers and the African foreign ministers get together and talk. And they also want to do more than talking now, also do some more concrete investments and business. As you mentioned also, EU as a group, of course, China is your biggest trading partner. But if we combine the European countries, we are the biggest trading partner with you, and also the biggest investor. And we are creating 350,000 jobs in South Africa. We had a business meeting also yesterday, and there's so many Danish companies that want to invest and create jobs in South Africa. Also, they want to export, because we also need jobs in Denmark. But definitely, I think it's something that will benefit both countries. And it's within the water and energy sectors and some of the challenges and opportunities that you have in South Africa. So I think that visit was also very good.
Absolutely. Well, and with that concludes the Danish perspective. And I know your time is limited. I think you have to go to something. Oh, there's a recommendation here.
Yes. We need to, I think we have invited you and reached out already, but we are having a reception tonight at the Grand Africa Cafe at 7:30, and the whole committee is invited. So we can just be in touch on that if somebody needs more details, and then we can continue the lively discussion.
And you heard Sasha wanted to engage. So there's a lot of possibilities, and we give the wine, so there's something.
But you produced it.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'll just say before I hand it over to you, of course, that we actually, we want to come with gifts. But we only have it for the chairman. So you have to, spend it wisely. But thank you so much. And we really mean that, because we are different political parties. We know that we are as well. So it's been very, very highly interesting to hear the different political parties' position. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Honorable Johnson. Just before we part ways, English is not our first language in South Africa.
It's not in the
Yeah. So it's the colonizers' language. So maybe sometimes we don't put things the way we would have put them in our own language. And I just want to reiterate the ANC's position, because I think we are misunderstood. The ANC doesn't support either Russia or Ukraine in that conflict. None of the two, right? That's the first thing. Secondly, the ANC does not condone the killing and maiming of people in Ukraine, right? That's the second thing. Thirdly, it is the wish, the insistence of the ANC that dialogue, nothing must come between the two countries in as far as dialogue is concerned. and that all progressive forces, all those who are interested in peace and development, must contribute to the peaceful settlement of the situation between Russia and Ukraine. Right? Fourthly, it is the belief of South Africa through the ANC and those forums that the global governance institutions must be used to advance the cause of unity and peace all over the world, including development. Right? That's our position. That's why I said, as the ANC, we're even going to the extent of inviting the president of Ukraine to come here. It looks like my colleague there is mixing our position with the EFF position. Now, the EFF position and the ANC position are not the same. But we can't deny our historical relationships with Russia when we're in the struggle. We can also deny our relationship with you, that you supported us. You stood up when we said sanctions must be imposed on the apartheid South Africa. When we said in the United Nations apartheid must be declared a crime against humanity, you supported the South Africa cause. So nobody can make us deny our relationship with yourselves. Nobody can come between that relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's Russia, whether it's the US, or they can't come between us in as far as that relationship is concerned. But please understand that the ANC is a broad church, right? There will be individuals at some point of our engagements who will speak something that is not exactly the position of the ANC, because we are an organization that allows free expression of views. And because the media gets excited about those particular views, because sometimes they are off the tangent, those are the ones that will get publicized throughout the media. But the official position of the ANC is the one that I have said here. All things being equal, during the 7th administration, we will visit you so that we can engage further. Now, we would want also that progressive forces should be able to say the loss of lives in Ukraine is not more important than the loss of life in Gaza, in Palestine, and anywhere in the world. So we need to treat those as a matter of principle. We need to say we condemn the loss of life. That's why, as the ANC, we condemn the action by Hamas. We don't call Hamas terrorists like the DA is doing, because we were called terrorists when we were fighting for a just cause. We know the pain of being called a terrorist when we are fighting for a just cause. Our call as the ANC is that all forces in Palestine must come together to engage with Israel so that there can be a peaceful settlement. We condemn what Hamas did. Openly, there was a statement by the ANC, and the wearing of the scarf of Palestinian people is a sign of solidarity. That scarf doesn't belong to Hamas. So this doesn't mean that we support Hamas. And in discussions between, not the government now, between Hamas and our leadership in the ANC does tell them where we stand, that we don't support them killing people. We don't care whether those people are in Israel or humanity has to live in peace. And that's our position. And we hope that peace can prevail in that part of. It's unfortunate that Prime Minister Netanyahu and those who are around him are moving away from the discussions and the resolutions of the UN on two-state solution. Because he is saying, no, Palestine in summary must just be destroyed, right? So he's talking like Hamas. Him and Hamas are talking the same language, basically. Hamas is saying you must destroy Israel. They don't want a two-state solution. Netanyahu is saying the same thing. So those are basically the two spoilers that must be engaged until they understand that using war to resolve that situation is not going to result in peace. The same in Ukraine and Russia. You can bring as much tanks as possible and so on. It will not result in a peaceful settlement. People will lose their lives. The economies of those countries will be affected, and the economies of the world will be affected. Future generations will inherit that war if we don't say, no, let there be dialogue. For instance, I don't understand why NATO is not establishing a team that can, at the same time that they are supporting what is happening in Ukraine against Russia, but have a team that's engaged in Russia as NATO and say, yes, we are supporting Ukraine, but this is a NATO team that is at the same time engaging. Even if they don't engage Russia, engage other forces that can assist in engaging Russia, but it must be a NATO position to say, we may be bringing the tanks, the money, the budget, and so on, but at the same time, let there be experts who can mediate in the conflict, so that as you fight, you also engage at the same time. That's just our thinking. But I want to thank you, Honorable Michael, for coming here in South Africa. We are people of peace in South Africa. We have a peaceful settlement here. We still live with horrendous situations of apartheid and colonialism, right? But we are not taking up arms against those developments. The manifestations are huge. I mean, if we can take you to Langa now, if you had time and you look at the situation there, it's painful, right? And what's happening in the farms, and I don't want to talk about the economy of this country. It's something that it defeats logic that you can have a minority of 7% controlling 95% of the economy. But we are not fighting. We are not taking up arms. The ANC is engaging with everybody to say, we need to continue to say South Africa belongs to all who live in it. That's why we are talking transformation of the economy. We are not saying this ones must go to hell and this ones must remain in the country. We will not take such a position. Again, thank you very much for contributing to our struggle against the apartheid, because apartheid was horrendous. And we are happy that on the books, yes, it's not there. Of course, there's still some remnants of apartheid. I'm sure you see some of the cases in the courts where farm workers are killed and so on. We also condemn the killing of the farmers themselves. And we hope that all other right-thinking people in the world can help South Africa to build its economy, to grow its economy. Our elections will go well. Please, wherever you go, spread the message that our elections will be peaceful. Our elections will be transparent, more transparent. So you see the numbers as the counting takes place. Every party has got a party agent where the voting and the counting is taking place. And they've got the power and the right to take the records there of all the proceedings. There's a multi-party structures that resolve a bit of differences on this and that in the elections and so on. So our elections, in line with the Constitution, will be free, they will be fair, they will be transparent, and our democracy will continue to be durable as South Africa. And we count on you to continue to be a support for the building of democracy and deepening of democracy here in South Africa. We have an invitation, yes, for tonight. We will be there. Some of us will not be there. As you know, tomorrow we must, by tomorrow, register candidates with the IEC. So if you don't see some of us there, because we are members of the National Executive, we have to finalize everything by midnight tonight so that we register So if you don't see us, don't think it's a stay away. Because we disagree on certain things. So it's exactly. We do have a gift for you, Chairman. When we walk out from here, we will follow that gentleman because we also want to take historical pictures outside. And then this is how we come to the end of this fruitful meeting for all of us. So the meeting is now closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.